Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's executive meeting. First thing I would normally do is record any apologies, but everybody that we expect to be here is here with no apologies. So welcome to councillors, public participants, and also those watching at home. The first agenda item tonight is declarations of interest. So I'll just give a couple of seconds for colleagues. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of agenda item 9, I have, I pressed it. Sorry, it is on.
I think you're just being maybe a bit quiet for
Right.
us at this end.
Okay. On my register of interest, it shows I'm an officer of Acomb Alive, and so I will not participate in agenda item 9.
Thank you very much. I didn't see any further hands, so in that case, no further declarations to make. Thank you very much, which then takes us on to agenda item 2, the minutes of the previous meeting, and these are at pages 1 to 12 in the published agenda pack. So I've got them in front of me, but again, I'll give colleagues a couple of seconds in case there are any issues they'd like to raise. If not, I will sign these as a correct record of that last meeting. So thank you all very much for that. That then takes us on to agenda item 3, public participation. And we've got 10 registered public participants, some joining in person and some on Zoom, which we will move between. Just to mention, our 10th public participant hasn't been able to join on Zoom at the moment, but may do. So we'll judge that when we get through the other 9. First public participant today is Janet Hobson. Agenda item, York as a World Heritage Site, and this is as chairman of the steering group. And welcome back. You will know that you have 3 minutes to talk to us, and I should mention as well that both yourself and John Oxley, who's the next speaker, have offered to answer questions in relation to agenda item 1 as well. So thank you, and 3 minutes over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've pressed the right button. In 2011, following an unsuccessful bid for World Heritage, City of York Council asked the steering group to continue work on a revised World Heritage bid in order to advise the council when the next opportunity came. This opportunity to start the process with a bid for a place on the UK World Heritage tentative list has arrived, and our advice is in this report. The report is the result of much thought and discussion, with advice from heritage experts and others with experience of World Heritage status, for example, its impact, implications, and management. We hope it provides all the information you need, but we are here for any questions you may have still. World Heritage status would support the Council's policies and ambitions for York, in particular by raising York's international profile, by helping to protect the heritage, both important for itself, but also for York's economy. In addition, World Heritage status would give recognition to the important contribution made by many local residents and organisations who are managing and caring for York heritage. We hope you will accept the report's recommendation that City of York Council makes a bid for World Heritage status for York. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Our second registered public speaker today is John Oxley on the same agenda item, York as a World Heritage Site. And this, again, is a member of the steering group in support and to answer any questions. What I might do, having thought about it, Janet and John, is rather than ask you questions now, is to wait until Charlie introduces the report and then invite you back at that stage, as it might be more useful then, if you don't mind. And John, 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In 2009, the council applied to be placed on the revised UK tentative list of World Heritage Sites. That bid was based solely on the outstanding universal value of York's exceptional subsurface archaeological deposits, and it was unsuccessful. In its 2010 report to the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, the expert panel that had been appointed to make recommendations judged that on their own, York's subsurface deposits lacked outstanding universal value. However, the panel made the recommendation that York should return in the future with a holistic bid for the historic city. And the proposal before you this evening is that holistic bid for the historic core of the city of York. The proposal identifies York's outstanding universal value as being the outstanding example in Northwest Europe of urban development that commences in the Roman period and continues from 71 AD as a living city down to the present day. The OUV, the outstanding universal value, is embedded within the urban form of the city, and it defines how the city will continue to develop in the future. That is implicit in the local plan that is being taken forward at the moment. Within this urban form, there are specific components that contribute to outstanding universal value. We have the exceptional stained glass in York Minster and the parish churches in the urban historic core. The town plan is an example of the way that York has assimilated different cultural attitudes and approaches to urban development over many centuries. York possesses buildings that represent each period of this development, from Roman sewers and defences to the brilliance of the buildings in which we meet this evening. This is a fantastic example of how York makes the most of its heritage, past and present and future, represented in this building. And of course, we have the unrivaled archaeological deposits and collections, the civic, ecclesiastical and corporate archives, the living tradition of the performance of the mystery play cycle on the streets of the city. And York's associated with people who have played huge roles in British, European and world history and culture. Constantine, Alcuin, Archbishop William of York, Mary Ward, Seabourn Rowntree, and of course, Dame Judi Dench deserves mention here too. We believe, therefore, that York possesses the necessary outstanding universal value that supports a bid to be placed on the revised UK tentative list of World Heritage Sites, and that York should be a World Heritage Site. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. As I said, I'll welcome you back when we get to that agenda item. Our third public speaker today is Flick Williams, who's speaking to us via Zoom, and that is also on York as a World Heritage Site and regards York's fitness to be a World Heritage Site. So hopefully you can hear me and you're with us and you have 3 minutes to speak to us.
Elected members, so you wish to apply for UNESCO World Heritage Site status? Really? Let's take a little tour. Other UNESCO sites, the Great Wall of China, the Imperial Palace and the Forbidden City, all made wheelchair accessible for the 2008 Olympic Games. The Statue of Liberty received its status in 1984, wheelchair accessible to the viewing platform and accessible ferries to get to Ellis Island. The Colosseum Rome, 2 internal lifts to go between the 5 floors and fully accessible toilet provision. Machu Picchu, the Pyramids of Giza, the Palace of Versailles, Table Mountain, you take the point. And back to York. Apart from the Minster, where the Church of England has gone to great lengths to improve access, what is there? The city walls, totally inaccessible. Clifford's Tower, £5 million later, completely inaccessible. So my unsolicited advice, having already failed once, is to quit while you're behind. As one fellow disabled activist said, and where a visitor's going to park, sit down or go to the toilet when they get here. You have significant work to do before you even think about it. I love this city, I chose it, and next year will have lived here for a quarter of a century, but both residents and visitors need you to do better. I am fearful that the constant PR attempt to talk it up exhibited by this authority is not being well received. The tendency of central government with their repetitive world-class and world-beating without supporting evidence starts to ring a little hollow. And this trend is obviously catching. For example, Councillor Eyre describes the My Castle Gateway project in the press as world-class. Others beg to differ. On the planning portal, a resident writes, more like a 1950s municipal park with less maintenance, and another begs you to run out of money before you touch the Eye of Yorkshire. Because this application comes at a cost, both financially and in terms of staff resource, would most residents view this as a priority? The danger is you become perceived as out of touch against a backdrop of an unprecedented cost of living crisis, where those on fixed and low incomes are being driven into food and fuel poverty. Against a backdrop of cuts to the SEND transport budget, and where adult social care is struggling to meet a tsunami of need. We can only guess the answer because despite another big survey, this is a question you failed to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, which will get taken into account during the meeting. Our fourth public speaker today is Andrew Mortimer, who's back here in person, registered to speak on agenda item 6, review of HMO supplementary planning documents on the expansion of HMOs, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting this evening. I'm speaking on behalf of the Badger Hill Residents Community Group about item 6. We support the need to review the planning rules around HMOs. We don't agree that the current policies are fit for purpose. In addition to the issues raised by Councillor Waters' motion, we urge you to review what we believe is a clear misuse of permitted development rights to increase the size of small HMOs. Both of you have had a chance to read our letter, which was sent to you a few days ago. This outlines our position in more detail. 10 years ago, the Council introduced the supplementary planning document to control the concentration of HMOs because it was identified that they were having a significant impact on residential amenity. Over that time, landlords have started to manage their properties differently. Recently in Badger Hill, we've seen many expand the size of their properties, either by increasing the number of tenants to the maximum allowed for small HMOs, or by changing use to large HMO. The latter category remains subject to planning approval, but the previous is being undertaken under claimed permitted development rights. This means that local people are being excluded from having any say on such developments, and important issues are not being considered. The issues that the supplementary planning document was introduced to control are being made worse by the ever-expanding size of HMOs. These include problems created by littering and accumulation of rubbish, noise between dwellings, especially at night, increased parking problems, and less commitment to maintain the quality of the local environment. As I mentioned previously, expansion of HMOs to accommodate 7 or more residents still requires planning approval. A recent application for such a property in Yarborough Way was turned down by the council and dismissed on appeal. The inspector made an important statement in his decision. He said, despite the property's existing use as an HMO, it is necessary to ensure that adequate facilities are provided to serve the higher number of tenants, in order to preclude, for example, indiscriminate parking, highway safety issues, and the unsightly storage of refuse bins or cycles to the front of the property. We agree with the inspector and believe that the basis for his decision should apply to all HMOs. If it's important to consider these issues when an HMO increases in size to accommodate 7 residents, it's equally important when an HMO increases in size to accommodate 6.
30 seconds.
The issues are the same. This, however, cannot happen while permitted development is being misused to increase the size of Class C4 small HMOs. Planning law is clear that permitted development is applicable to Class C3 dwelling houses, but much less clear when it comes to small HMOs. The council now has the opportunity to sort this out and ensure that the expansion of HMOs in York is dealt with fairly and consistently. We ask that you update your planning policies as soon as possible to make it clear that in York, the expansion of small HMOs does require a planning application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll take into account your comments when we consider agenda item 6. Our fifth public speaker today is joining us via Zoom, Alan Richards, and that is also on agenda item 6, review of HMO, to give a case study of building work on an HMO and its effect on local residents. So hopefully you can hear us, and 3 minutes, over to you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, we can hear you.
Great. I'd like to give you an example of why Badger Hill residents are concerned. 29 Derrimore Drive, a bungalow occupied by students. It was extended late last year. And what happened was several vans and a portable toilet rolled up one morning, parked up on the verge, spread a lot of mud and dust liberally around the place, and generally made a lot of noise. We looked for a planning application on the CYC database to see what was going on. Nothing. Strange. We rang and emailed CYC and were told that they'd get back to us. There was a lot of work in the back garden after that. It seemed as if the rooms being built could look over the neighbouring garden and kitchen. It's not what I'd want where I live. We followed up with CYC again. Now we found out the builder had applied for planning permission retrospectively, but it had been refused and no one was quite sure what would happen next. Maybe the builders were going to appeal and see what happened. It just seemed so disorganised. Where particularly is the consideration for residents? Transparency. Who has responsibility for what? And so does a process like this actually save any time or promote any goodwill? We believe it can be much improved. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. And again, we'll take them into account when we consider agenda item 6. Our next public speaker today is Councillor Waters, also registered on agenda item 6, review of HMO supplementary planning documents. And you will know what you're doing. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. It's the first executive I've attended to speak for some time now, largely because it became apparent early on in 2019 just what a self-serving setup was being run here. The self-interest of coalition members and the corporate team in propping one another up after the circumstances of the last chief executive's departure ever more evident, which leads me smoothly into agenda item 6. The instruction by full council in December for executive to initiate without delay a review of the absolutely not fit for purpose HMO supplementary planning document. This instruction included the aim of reducing the acceptable thresholds for new HMO approvals by half. I noted in December the attempt by the Lib Dem Green coalition to wreck the motion promoting this, which you were unable to do so because of an interesting set of circumstances in which the Lord Mayor couldn't vote due to his prejudicial involvement in HMO management. I also note that back in 2015, when I requested the local plan working group look at the HMO SPD, the Lib Dem chair of that group refused to give the matter any time. In areas around the 2 universities, the accommodation situation continues to spiral out of control. Unchecked, greedy expansion of student numbers by the universities is blighting residential neighbourhoods, with increasing numbers of HMOs being waved through by this council, in addition to the unlawful ones that just start up. All in addition to the vast increase in off-campus student accommodation. It's time to get this situation under control. Anything less than approving option 1 is an absolute disgrace and a signal to York council tax-paying residents that this coalition is quite content to see the ongoing spread of the suburban campus into residential streets. As for reviewing the supplementary planning document, somehow scuppering the local plan, I would hazard a guess it will be scuppered by other matters long before such detail is discussed. But referring to doing nothing about this matter until the local plan is approved is absolutely ludicrous. I am, though, interested in the logic applied by the author of this report, given that this document, the excellent 2014 Streetscape Guide, is an approved document in the local plan suite of documents, but Director Ferris has effectively binned it. Will the local plan now fail?
30 seconds.
It is very much topical at the moment how second and multiple homeowners are distorting housing markets in holiday destinations in the UK, and I would suggest in university cities like York as well. Are you going to act for the benefit of council tax-paying residents in York, or continue to encourage the spread of the student landlords? And finally, I do think in the interest of transparency that officers at assistant director level and above are required to declare the ownership of second homes in York, most especially those involved in reports like this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and we'll take into account your comments when we consider the agenda item. Our seventh registered speaker today is Councillor Douglas, who's joining us via Zoom, and that is on two agenda items, the York Central Enterprise Zone and the future of Acomb Front Street, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'm speaking on agenda item 9, enhancing Acomb Front Street. May 2017, 5 years ago. This is the date outlined in the report when the Lib Dem executive committed to improve the street environment of this important neighbourhood shopping area. I, along with the many businesses and local people who operate from or use Acomb Front Street, cannot emphasise enough how frustrated we are with the lack of progress on this project. 5 years later and very little has been achieved other than initial untested ideas and Christmas lights. The reason given for the extensive delays being COVID is ridiculous. You'll recognise the gap between May 2017 and the onset of COVID in March 2020 is almost 3 years. The £50,000 earmarked in previous budgets going back to 2018 isn't enough to progress this project, and no additional money has been committed by the administration in their budget for 2022-23. The Labour amendment to the 22-23 budget committed capital funds to Acomb Front Street improvements, recognising the importance of investing in Front Street now and not at some unspecified time in the future. I've already said this to Councillor Waller at his decision-making session in January. Given Front Street sits in his ward of Westfield, I would have expected him to push harder for this project. 5 years and still waiting just isn't acceptable to the people working to make their living in the area and wanting to see some tangible improvements. An area business owners and residents feel intensely proud of and can see the untapped potential of. Without me campaigning on the issue, visiting and speaking to the local businesses, raising awareness about the lack of action through the media and speaking at council committee meetings, I doubt there would have even have been this paltry level of progress. Westfield expects more. On item 8, York Central Enterprise Zone funding agreement, it's most certainly good to see the project moving ahead. Rising building costs and other inflationary pressures are a very real and ongoing concern for the project. This can't be underestimated. I'm particularly interested in the inward investment strategy for the site, and I'm hoping the large-scale anchor tenant network Rail and Homes England are in negotiation with will bring secure, well-paid and socially responsible jobs to the city. The council's commitment to the Good Business Charter shows that our city doesn't just want any employers. We want those who will invest in the people of our city, paying a real living wage as a minimum and offering good employment terms and conditions. I hope the inward investment team in CYC will have some input into this process to ensure a good outcome for the future of our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, and we'll consider them when we look at agenda items 8 and 9 later. Our 8th public speaker is Councillor Melly, also joining us on Zoom and also registered on those two agenda items 8 and 9. And you have 3 minutes to talk to us.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, on agenda item 8, I'm disappointed to see a recommendation to delegate to officers the discharge of conditions to permit the closure of Lehman Road. There are conditions attached to the stopping up order and to the outline planning permission, and the report reads as if you are being asked to delegate the sign-off of all of them. But one condition in particular absolutely cannot be delegated to officers. It would be an absolute travesty to delegate the approval of the walkway agreement. This is a crucial planning condition that will govern the ability, or currently more accurately, inability of thousands of residents to walk or cycle to and from the city centre. It dictates the rules of who can use the path, when, what their conduct and behaviour must be. It compels residents to submit to having their personal property searched. So far, there's been no public engagement or consultation on this document, even though it will have a huge impact on thousands of residents for decades to come. I've already informed officers that I will call in the approval of this condition to the Planning Committee, so if you agree today to instead delegate this approval to officers, you will be consenting to this agreement being done in private. You'll be taking away all transparency and accountability. The public's right to have their say on new rules that will have a huge impact on their daily lives. It will disproportionately be women, children, disabled people and cyclists who suffer from your decision. On a more positive note, I'm really pleased to see a recommendation to finally take the inadequacies of the Holgate stretch of the Riverside Path seriously and commit funding to the much needed, way overdue improvements. The amount recommended for approval from you today is nowhere near enough to make all the necessary improvements and doesn't suggest any timescales for actually making improvements, but it's a big step in the right direction. This is something that my ward colleagues have campaigned for since we were elected and that the local community has been crying out for even longer than that. So please approve the funding that we've asked for, but also commit to going further to bring the path fully up to standard. The final thing I'd like to say on this agenda item is that when agreeing the transfer of ownership of the canteen building on Chancery Rise to Network Rail, a proviso of that should be that council officers work in partnership with Network Rail to provide a community space as part of whatever agreement is reached. The reason given for this property disposal is in order to facilitate Network Rail moving operations off the York Central site. This should free up space on the site for an interim, much needed community space. I urged you to do this last time you gave public property away to Network Rail for £1, but you declined to take the opportunity to provide benefit for local residents. So please work collaboratively with Network Rail this time. Finally, on agenda item 11, if there really isn't time to bring the finalised bus service improvement plan to the full executive, it should at least be brought to a transport executive decision session rather than delegated to officers. The level of public and stakeholder engagement on the plan so far has been woefully inadequate, so it must be at least be approved at a public meeting. The bus industry is in crisis and the council has been awarded significantly less funding than was applied for. The limited funding that we do have needs to be spent as effectively and creatively as possible and needs public input. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments there, which I note were actually about agenda item 8 York Central and agenda item 11, which I'm sure others picked up on the DFT's bus funding announcement, so we'll take them into account later in the meeting. Our ninth public speaker today is Councillor Vassie, who is with us, and that's on agenda item 10, the future of primary places at Naburn Primary School. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. What is the point of a local school? It's a place for people, little people, to grow up in a community. It's about walking to school. It's about being and learning with neighbours, friends who live nearby. Friends you can play with once you leave school, you can play out at the end of the day. We cherish local schools because they're about community and feeling safe, as well as education. When you reach year 6, it's about developing independence, walking to school by yourself or with friends, walking home from school to a friend's house. The council is finalising our climate change strategy. Education is part of something larger. How will our children have confidence in grown-ups' claims to be creating a low-carbon future for their sakes if we oblige them to be ferried miles to school in private cars to learn about carbon emissions and how we should be cutting them? This is also about a community's heart. Naburn has already lost its post office and is facing what residents characterise as heavy-handed planning regulations that make it difficult for young families, young couples to add extensions to their homes so that they can start a family. At what point does a living community cease to be a place where generations live together? Are we condemning Naburn to becoming little more than a collection of retirement homes? Yes, the school faces a number of challenges. The pandemic hasn't helped, nor have falling pupil numbers or a difficult Ofsted report. But there are, I understand, 13 local children who could be in Naburn Primary School if their parents wished them to be there. If we all show more confidence in the school, will parents and the community respond? Have we done enough to know the answer to that? Many people say things to justify the economies of scale. Forget little schools, they're not viable. But scale isn't everything. Small is also beautiful. Having spoken with the diocesan director for the Diocese of York, with officers and the executive member, I know you all care about this issue. I welcome the decision to set up a meeting for the whole community so that options and real challenges can be discussed openly and honestly. Once closed, schools do not reopen. We must look at the long-term future of this small village, this school, and the city as a whole. I support option 3 and the efforts to identify an academy sponsor and look forward to playing my part in helping that whatever happens next happens with the support and engagement and understanding of the whole community. Local schools matter, Naburn School matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll take your comments into account when we consider agenda item 10. Unfortunately, as I mentioned at the start, our 10th public speaker was unable to join us on Zoom, so I'd like to thank all our public participants today. And that then means we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the forward plan, which is listed on pages 13 and 14. And I'll just give a couple of seconds in case any colleagues have any points to raise. And otherwise, I'll assume that we are content to accept that. I'm seeing nods, so a majority of us content to accept the forward plan. Thank you very much. Which then takes us on to agenda item 5, York as a World Heritage Site. And this starts on page 15. And I can see that Charlie's coming to the table. So what I'll do, as mentioned, if I don't know, Charlie, whether you want John and Janet to join you now.
That makes sense, yeah.
Just if you wouldn't mind, Janet and John, coming back to the table, and then if after Charlie's introductions there are any questions, Charlie might help us decide who would be best placed to answer. But Charlie, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The steering group's report today is timely, as the government has now invited applications for a new tentative list of sites for potential nomination for inscription on the UNESCO World Heritage List. This list will be submitted to UNESCO later this year, with a view to putting forward nominations to the World Heritage Committee from 2024. And the consultation on this new tentative list closes on the 15th of July. The steering group is to be thanked for the huge amount of work that has gone into getting us to this point. An enormous amount of expert advice has been freely given to inform this carefully thought through proposal. The scale of the task ahead of us as a city cannot, however, be underestimated. Because all World Heritage sites have to be of global importance, the World Heritage List is inevitably highly selective, and many places of national or even international significance will not make it onto the list. Nonetheless, today's report marks an important step on our potential journey.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll open it to colleagues for any questions and comments. Go to Councillor Smalley first.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by, thanking Charlie for that introduction, but also Janet and John for speaking this evening. And I'd like to echo and expand that thanks to all members of the York World Heritage Steering Group for all the work that's been done over many, many years and to put into developing the report before us today. I think many, particularly visitors to York, will be surprised to hear that York doesn't already have World Heritage status with our world-renowned archaeological and built heritage that we all enjoy every day. And thanks to the work of many, this proposal marks 12 years of discussion and hard work. And we've heard tonight how this proposal has been developed to be more holistic than the previous bid. And I hope we can go forward with greater success, starting with securing status on the UK tentative list. With that said, Chair, I'm happy to support the recommendations as set out on page 15 of the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Craghill.
Thank you. This is a question. There's been a little bit of concern that possibly taking this forward could have some kind of impacts on our climate change ambitions in terms of the relationship between planning, heritage, and the things we need to do as a whole city to tackle climate change. I just wondered if one of you could give us some reassurance on that question.
I'll start. John can continue. I think the only reassurance we can give at the moment is that it's already being looked at by York Conservation Trust, how one can possibly implement these measures that we will need to do and how they can be implemented in a subtle way that won't impact on the heritage. I know that the Conservation Trust has already been looking at this because they own so many properties which will be affected. It's obviously a problem that all historic cities and buildings are facing. So I'm sure there will be advances in the next few years, well, pretty quickly, I would have thought. That's all one can say, but I'm sure there are a lot of people out there looking for answers and how one can do this gently so as not to destroy the heritage. Because
potentially we could lead the way on how you do that.
It would be a bit disastrous, to put it mildly. I don't know if John wants to add anything.
Chair, I think the only thing I'd add to that is to say that the city centre, the historic core of York, is already littered, if you like, with listed buildings and with conservation area status. So the issue of dealing with heritage structures in terms of a zero carbon agenda, the issue of World Heritage in many ways, I think, gives the city an opportunity to be able to develop best practice and how a place with the depth of heritage that York has, how it can work with organisations like York Conservation Trust, and Chief Executive is here this evening supporting this the report, to see how York can actually use its experience and expertise to place itself as a leading authority on how heritage can be adapted to address the zero carbon agenda.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for the report. I've got 3 questions, Chair. Do you want them all at once, or do you want one after the other? Or
if they're relatively short, you could do them together.
My questions are always short. Okay, there's a couple of issues, 2 from the report and 1 from what you were saying earlier, John. So on page 26 of the report, 3.10, criteria number 2 that we need to hit to get the World Heritage status, to exhibit important interchange of human values. Would any of the comments that were made by one of the public speakers about lack of disabled access to some of the most notable sites in the city, and also including the recent blue badge ban from the city centre, would that have an impact on the bid? Because clearly, in terms of human values, some people will be excluded. In terms of 5.4 and 5.5, which is basically about picking up the tab, I noticed that it will be up to the next administration to pick up the tab. Any ideas as to how that's going to be funded? 200 to 250,000 pounds. And the final question, just with reference to us being noted for our subsurface archaeology, we know that there is a lively discussion going on at the moment between the Council for British Architecture and the York Archaeological Trust as to whether or not the proposed dig at the Roman Museum is adequate. I think the Council for British Architecture is the view that it would do more harm than good. If that was to go ahead, would that damage the bid? Thanks.
not sure where to begin. Thank you. A lot of things we can't answer. I would have thought accessibility is a very important part of World Heritage, actually. I think as far as ideas for getting funds, all I could say at this point is that this first stage, although we have listed it might cost up to 7,500 to make the bid for the tentative list, we actually at the most will have spent £2,000 and there's no more that will be required. We have done everything possible to keep to prevent costs to the council. I think as a former councillor, one appreciate why one understands this so clearly. People have given their time, they've given so much that, you know, it's been really very encouraging. But there is this principle, we cost the council as little as possible. Now, obviously this is a vast sum to raise. And partnership is a very important aspect of it. And I think one of the recommendations Charlie has made is to put an emphasis on seeking partnership for this. And certainly this would be the line we would take as well. Obviously, one would hope the council would be part of the contribution, but we realise it's asking an awful lot. The Roman Museum, I shall leave to John, I think.
Just an additional point on disabled access. The application for World Heritage status is actually a very technical process that revolves around the definition of outstanding universal value. And UNESCO has a whole set of guidance in its operational guidelines about how that is addressed and dealt with. Accessibility is not actually an issue that would be considered in determining whether York should be a World Heritage Site or not. It's a technical assessment around outstanding universal value. However, physical and intellectual access to the past is something that is of supreme importance to everybody. And I think the agenda of how one makes the past more accessible is something that would need to be explored, even if York didn't become a World Heritage Site. You know, I think that it is a key issue. On the issue of subsurface archaeology, if the Roman house, if that scheme goes ahead, would that damage York's bid for World Heritage status? I'll pass on the above ground issues. The below ground issues, to me, that site offers a unique set of circumstances and opportunities to explore York's Roman past. There isn't another site like it that has the combination of quality of deposits, quality of preservation, and opportunity to carry out an excavation supported by an outstanding archaeological organisation and a developer. So for me, it's an opportunity that when it comes along, it should be grasped. The archaeological policy that was adopted many years ago by the council set out how such schemes could be achieved independent of above ground development. And I think that scheme, the archaeological aspects of that scheme, are of such importance that I would hope that if the development itself did not go ahead, then the archaeological organisations would take those old City Council policy objectives and see how they could pursue the excavation of those deposits under their own steam. In terms of the UNESCO criteria, UNESCO lays great emphasis on preservation of deposits. However, they also lay great emphasis on the need to understand those deposits. And archaeology is a unique process in that in order to understand something, you have to destroy it. And so there is always that balance between destruction and the returns that one gets, and it has to be weighed up very, very carefully. And I think here in York, for a long time, that balance has been achieved magnificently. So the Hungate scheme, the University of York scheme, these exhibit how development can take place and realise archaeological benefits. And I think UNESCO would look at that site in that context. Sorry, I went on a bit long there, sorry.
Thank you very much. I can't see any further indications from colleagues. So we had the recommendation earlier from Councillor Smalley to accept the recommendations that are in front of us at paragraph 2. And before I propose that, can I just add my own thanks to officers and steering group members who I know over very many years have worked on previous bids and this bid, and a little bit like you said, Janet, an awful lot of voluntary time and expertise continues to go in to make this case. And I look forward to hearing more and the work that we can then do together towards that list. So we have the recommendations in front of us. If I could please see either a show of hands or a nod if colleagues are happy to accept those recommendations. Thank you very much. That's a clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations at paragraph 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that then takes us on to the next agenda item today, which is agenda item 6, review of the control and concentration of houses in multiple occupation, that starts on page 67 of our pack. And Neil is going to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. This report is brought to you, as Councillor Waters has said, as a public speaker at the request of full council. I'd note in respect of the public speakers from Badger Hill that both of their points that they were wishing to raise were in relation to the use of permitted development rights for Class 4 HMOs expansion. And I'll get the planning officers to respond to their request because that's not actually the subject of the reporting itself. Councillor Waters mentioned, as well as the purpose of the resolution of full council, the area around the university in terms of expansion. I just note for members that the current local plan that's going through public inquiry, the area of, so we say, disagreement between both the council and the university is the degree of expansion, and the city council's policy is effectively seeking to restrict the expansion of the university to what it believes, what you believe as councillors, to be proportionate. And finally, just in respect of the increase in off-site campus provision, yes, that is the case, but it is purpose-built off-site campus provision that is being made, and one might allude, and clearly cause and effect is very difficult to prove, but it could be that the fact the policy is working in terms of the non-conversion of domestic residences, that is forcing the provision of bespoke student accommodation across the city. But clearly I can't evidence that because it's a cause and effect that's difficult to demonstrate, but clearly you can make your own judgment call on that. In respect to the report itself, I draw members' attention in respect of recommendation 1 to paragraphs 36, 37 and 38 as to the options regarding the HMO policies and the relationship with the local plan, and the significant risk that undertaking a review of the HMO policies which form part of the local plan at this stage would have for the local plan process. And clearly, if with a fair wind we do get adoption of the local plan within the year, then any review isn't in the dim and distant future. It could be instigated relatively quickly after adoption. Indeed, we know that the government is currently proposing to go out and consult further on national planning policy grounds, so it may be that we're required to undertake an early review of a local plan at a later stage. In recommendation 2, I would ask members to know paragraph 20 with regard the more frequent flow of information to guard against the error identified in the local government social ombudsman decision, and that in paragraph 24 that whilst there is a separate regulatory regime for HMO licensing, and the council has been consulting on changing in that licensing regime, and so just to be clear, it is an entirely separate regime. The proposals that members have been consulted, that the council has been consulting on, and that are due to come back to executive in the summer, will effectively increase the regulatory regime in the area of greatest concern for the planning policy, which is the area of highest density around the university. So there will be opportunities for the efficient use of resources for the management of those separate regulatory regimes at that time. So the recommendation 2 effectively alludes to the fact that that would be the time to consider resources for enforcement. In recommendation 3, I draw members' attention to the ICO decision in that they were in agreement that the council can withhold the identification of specific student HMO locations, because clearly that is the personal information of the occupants of the property, not the nature of the property in itself. Paragraph 29, because the council's resolution talked about the provision of data, just want to allude on recommendation 3. Paragraph 29, we have historically provided a heat map of HMO numbers, and which effectively gives the indication of the likelihood of a HMO application being successful from a planning perspective. However, when you look at the actual application of policy in paragraph 12 and 13, that heat map does not accurately reflect the policy, as the policy is applied to the individual property itself and not on a ONS boundary by boundary basis. So members are asked to consider if we continue to publish or start to ongoingly publish that heat map, or will the fact that the HMO database as it will be published and be a matter of public record is sufficient for future applicants for HMOs to undertake their own analysis using our policies, and to determine again the implications of the purchase of any particular property or the conversion of a property to HMOs. That's my summary, Chair.
Thank you very much, and I'll open the item for any comments or questions, and first go to Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the points raised by the speakers, I shall certainly be following up with Neil Ferris on that, and I would draw attention to recommendation 2 in terms of the enhanced enforcement capacity of the planning team, which has been something that many members have raised on a variety of issues, and this one of the speakers tonight raised that very point. So I think that in terms of ensuring that there is the capacity to respond to a situation, that this ensures that that's built into the future HMO licensing report. In terms of the recent ICO decision, notice that's clearly interest in ensuring that at the time an item comes to planning committee, that there is accurate information about the proportion of existing HMOs within a particular street. I'm conscious that there is interest in maintaining a mix within streets and ensuring that the existing policies are enforced. So this does take the principle. I appreciate it's not gone as far as some members of council, and I do actually appreciate the efforts that they are making, but I think this does answer many of the points asked for.
Thank you very much, Councillor Craghill.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make a few comments in addition to that from a housing perspective. Obviously, as the planning issue, but it's also about housing, clearly. I do welcome and support the recommendations in the paper. I think the paper sets out very clearly that to review the draft SPD on the concentration of HMOs at this point would not make sense in planning terms and would potentially undermine getting a local plan in place. I do believe it's extremely important for York to do that. We can then go on to review that plan, as Neil Ferris said, in a number of detailed aspects, and this policy could be part of that future review process if required. I also welcome the references in paragraph 43, I think, that such a future review would need to be based on a clear set out process that considers the appropriateness of all the thresholds in all respects without prejudging the outcome. I'd also just like to comment on some of the other aspects very briefly. I want to, aspects of the recommendations. I want to welcome the greater clarity on how we as a council manage the HMO database, as this report sets out, and particularly on the information sharing and close working between the housing licensing team and the planning enforcement team, which I'm pleased to see, including the process for incorporating information provided by the public, which is all set out at paragraph 15. The proposals on additional licensing of HMOs with 3 to 4 occupants, if adopted by executive when they come forward in the summer, would also help to add to the information base, contributing the more up-to-date assessment of the numbers for HMOs in any given street or area. I would just like to highlight the very successful work that has been done so far, which is referred to in the paper at paragraph 33 by housing licensing officers, which has very effectively improved the quality of management of HMOs with 5 or more occupants under the statutory licensing. As the paper says, legal enforcement has been a last resort, but has been used when necessary. And the extensive and proactive work that officers have done through housing licensing with landlords has really delivered results, and I think does hold out that prospect for improvements in this area that speakers, public speakers, are looking for, if that is approved. And finally, I'd just like to note, as the paper does at paragraph 7, that HMOs play an important role in providing housing options in York. That isn't just for students, but it's for others, including young professionals and people on low incomes. And I think these proposals are taking us in the right direction with more robust data that can help us to balance communities across the city, and with the potential to further improve our data and the quality of HMO provision in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
Oh, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Neil, for the report. I've got a few areas, some clarification on some issues. In terms of paragraph 24, wouldn't more robust enforcement and fining of road landlords bring income in to help fund the enforcement? On paragraph 29, as far as I can see, and I might be wrong, but as far as I can see, the thresholds that we've got in policy, in the emerging local plan H8, are the same as the SPDs in terms of 20% in a neighbourhood, 10% on a street length. So I'm not really sure why one would supersede or knock out the other. Don't see why that would change things. Paragraph 31. The LGCSO complaint was upheld. We did not have a good enough database, but the reason for the complaint is that we weren't robustly enforcing our policies. You know, it wasn't just an admin issue. And I've got to say, paragraph 31 reads to me, tell me if I'm wrong, but it reads to me as though the City Council is throwing in the towel on this issue and saying that this is not a priority. Enforcement of HMOs is not a priority for the City Council. Will come as a bit of a shock to the Liberal Democrat activists that we heard talking here tonight who want something done about it in Badger Hill. And finally, I think in terms of trying to get the university to house more of its own students, the bottom line is always going to be, is it not, that HMOs are always going to be more desirable to students because they're cheaper, more desirable to landlords because the tenants are only going to be there for a limited period of time. I mean, my lad is in student accommodation in Bristol, and he can't wait to get into an HMO because it's going to be so much cheaper and actually a better place to be. So, you know, are we not kind of, the market will always drive students into HMOs unless we get tough over enforcing them.
Chair. In respect, I'll just go through those in order. Enforcement activity in terms of fining people. The council's enforcement policy is very clear. We've worked through a process of informing people, educating them, and enforcing. Any legislative regime that you are granted with as a council requires you to go through a considered process. The object of the exercise is to get compliance with the regulatory regime, not to raise funds, and that's a fundamental premise of all our enforcement activity across the council. Councillor Kilbane's absolutely correct in terms of the local plan and SPD plans being consistent together, and it is the local plan policy that takes precedence over the SPD policy. Therefore, the two cannot mismatch. So therefore, a review of the SPD would mean a review of the local plan policy, and hence the risk to the local plan. In terms of paragraph 31 and throwing in the towel, I think the fact that the authority is currently consulting on increasing its HMO regulation in terms of the quality of HMOs demonstrates very clearly from an office perspective of the understanding of the decision of the council and executive is that you continue to have a clear focus on the quality of, and the quantity of provision for HMO. But I would absolutely agree and apologise to executive for the error in terms of the mismanagement of the information that was identified by the LGSCO in terms of the planning decision that was undertaken last summer, and that was clearly identified by the Ombudsman. In terms of the market provision, you are, by having an Article 4 direction across the whole city and having the policies in place, you are constraining the market for the provision of HMOs within the whole city. We do have areas of density associated with the universities, and the purpose of the policy when it was implemented was to spread that density across the whole city, so there wasn't a disproportionate impact on any single community. And I think my analysis, and is again, it's difficult to evidence it, is the fact that there is a lot more purpose-built student accommodation being built in York, and because you have constrained the market for HMO in terms of conversion, it is having that impact of generating more provision of purpose-built accommodation.
Thank you very much. I cannot see any other indications to speak. So obviously we heard from Councillor Bullock and Councillor Crackhill, and we have the recommendations in front of us on page 68. So again, if I could see a hand or a nod from colleagues if they're happy to accept those recommendations. Thank you very much. There's clear consensus in favour of accepting the recommendations on page 68. Thank you very much. So that then moves us on to agenda item 7, which is the physical activity strategy. And this starts at page 89 of the agenda pack. And I can see that Fiona is here to present this to us. So over to you.
Thank you. So I'm pleased to present to you our physical activity and sport strategy for York. This is a piece of work that was started pre-COVID and largely finished at that time, but had not gone through the formal adoption processes. So we've worked closely with North Yorkshire Sport, who are commissioned to produce the strategy as the subject experts and to undertake consultation on the content of the strategy. The strategy aligns with the joint health and wellbeing strategy for York, given the overwhelming evidence of the benefit of being physically active in preventing ill health, supporting mental well-being and helping people to be healthier for longer. It also aims to support the economic strategy through having a healthier workforce and the climate change strategy as well through promoting active travel. So the scope of the strategy focuses on reducing sedentary behaviour, increasing the number of residents that meet the Chief Medical Officer's guidance on physical activity, whether that's through active travel or active recreation, and more structured sport and ensuring a varied and accessible offer for our residents. So we've taken a life course approach in the strategy. So for children and young people, this is about forming good habits and skills to support physical activity into later life and creating environments in which children can be active. For adults, ensuring there is a wide offer of clubs and activities that are inclusive and promoting some of the national campaigns on physical activity. And for ageing well, supporting other programmes of work such as the age-friendly city work and working with partners in the NHS to embed physical activity as part of the treatment of a number of health conditions. In terms of communities, the strategy sets out our ambition to work with partners to ensure that developer contributions are used for the benefit of physical activity and sport. Continue to use the principles of active design and healthy placemaking in new developments, support colleagues working on active travel to promote the benefits of active travel and supporting employers to introduce active travel schemes in their workplaces, and also to build on the work already being done around volunteering through our People Helping People strategy, to ensure that physical activity is embedded both in terms of the offer to residents in attending activities run by volunteers, but also the training offered by organisations to support people to be volunteers and run those activities. And finally, supporting organisations that exist in the city and run the many activities that are there. And underpinning all of the strategy really is our ambition to reduce inequalities. We have high rates of physical activity in the city, so we want to make sure that those opportunities are there for all. So if members are minded to adopt the strategy, the York Active Partnership Steering Group will take over overall responsibility for delivering the strategy, with regular reports on progress to the Health and Wellbeing Board, and the phases of delivery are outlined on page 108. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll open it for any questions or comments to colleagues. Go to Councillor Smalley first.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Fiona, for that fantastic and comprehensive introduction. I'd like to start by thanking officers for their work in bringing our new physical activity and sport strategy before us today. I know the public health teams and the community sports teams have worked very hard alongside North Yorkshire Sport over many years to develop this strategy and consult heavily with stakeholders. I'm also pleased, as you've just mentioned, that the proposal to set up an Active York strategic steering group as set out on page 16 of the strategy. I think this, as set out, will really ensure the strategy is delivered over the next decade and that the momentum behind it isn't lost and it continues to be delivered. With that said, Chair, I'm happy to support and move the recommendations as set out on page 89.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Runciman.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the Health and Wellbeing Board, of which I am Chair, I'd like to thank Lee and George for all the work they've done on this. Having a 10-year strategy is very impressive. I know that the Health and Wellbeing Board will be delighted to know that it's come before the exec tonight. And I want to emphasise that this may be about physical activity, but it also impinges on people's mental health. And that is absolute top priority for the Health and Wellbeing Board. So thank you very much for all the work. And the fact it lasts for 10 years is something we will welcome. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
How did you know, Chair? How did you know? Okay, thank you, and thanks for the report. Just three questions. On page 105, the active travel section, we talk about taking 30% of cars off the road to improve air quality. And then we also talk about investing in electric charging. Are we saying we want 30% of cars off the road? Because I'm not sure how switching people from petrol cars to electric cars increases their cycling and walking or active travel. I'm not quite sure why that's sitting in the strategy in the way that it is at all. On page 118, I noticed that in terms of, I think we're into the equalities impact assessment here. I noticed that we are relying upon the guidance from the Equality and Human Rights Commission on single-sex spaces, and that was extremely controversial when it came out. And I would like to know if the exec is happy to rely on that advice. And also on page 120, there is explicitly a part of the strategy that will bar trans women from women's changing rooms. And I want to know if the exec is happy with that, given its public commitment to trans rights.
And so on the point on page 105, I think the point that we were making there in the strategy was trying to place it in the context of what happened in COVID. So what we're saying is during COVID, there were reduced cars on the road due to various restrictions. And so the strategy isn't setting out to necessarily maintain that reduction, but what we're saying is that you know, in the context of COVID, many people changed to walking and cycling more. So what we want to do is, you know, we know that those changes can be made. It's part of that behaviour change. So our ambition in this strategy is to encourage people to maintain some of those behaviours that they adopted during the COVID pandemic. Shall I address the other, in terms of the equality impact assessment? I think what we were trying to do within that assessment is to acknowledge that there are some aspects within the governing body regulations on sport that do have an impact on how people from transgender communities can access sport, particular structured sport through governing bodies. The strategy that we've laid out can't really influence that. Those are national requirements set out through those governing bodies, but we felt that we should acknowledge that within here. It's something to be aware of, but it's something that the strategy can't really address.
Thank you very much. Councillor Smalley.
Yes, I hope that helps, and thank you, Fiona, for that clarification. And just to reiterate on, I guess, on the public record, our commitment as an administration to trans rights. I think it's probably doing a good job as an equalities impact assessment in terms of explaining where the government regulation falls down in that sense. I probably think this is one of the areas where myself and yourself, Councillor Gilbane, agree entirely on the importance to protect transgender people.
Cannot see any other hands. So we've got the recommendations in front of us on agenda item 7. And again, if I could please see those colleagues that are happy to accept those recommendations, please. That's a clear consensus in favour of accepting that new strategy. Thank you very much. That then moves us to agenda item 8, which is the York Central Enterprise Zone funding agreement, and this starts on page 129, and I'll give Tracy and Tony a couple of seconds to join us and check if Neil, are you starting or straight to Tracy, and whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to introduce the report. We have Tony Clark here, who has recently taken over the role of specifically on the York Central project to undertake all of the technical assessment work on the highways infrastructure on behalf of the Highways Authority. So when you ask difficult questions about roads and stopping up orders, Tony's here to bail me out. So York Central, as we know, has been a priority for this city, for this region for well over 2 decades. And it's been an obsession of mine for the last 10 of those. I can't even count the number of times I've presented reports on York Central, either to executive or to other committees. But this really does represent the next episode, and the report is seeking the release of the previously agreed enterprise zone budget of 35 million to deliver the enabling infrastructure and to enter into a funding agreement with Homes England, who will be delivering that infrastructure. That £35 million prudential borrowing will be repaid by through the retention of business rates of all of the new businesses that will be locating on the site. So in order to evaluate that updated risk profile of undertaking that borrowing, we have updated the enterprise zone modelling and undertaken sensitivity analysis on kind of revised timescale for implementation with various variants on that as to whether or not the scheme proceeds at pace, at full bore on the volume of commercial space available, or whether it's a slower rollout of that. But in all of those models, they indicated that the level of upfront investment that we're requesting in this report can be funded across a wide range of those potential development scenarios. And confidence levels in the scale and success of the commercial elements of this scheme are also increasing. Landowners have recently this week gone out to procure development partners, and they are in negotiation with a large-scale anchor tenant, which would both underpin the enterprise zone borrowing and provide somewhere in the region of 2,500 new jobs in the city, which has always been one of the biggest of the ambitions for York Central. The report also sets out arrangements for the undertaking and funding the technical assurance work to enable the adoption of the highways infrastructure. Questions to Tony. And it also commits £250,000 to resource the council's inward economic growth team to increase the resource for inward investment activity, so that we can be driving and promoting York Central to be able to attract new occupiers who deliver the kind of development we want to see on the site. So it's not a first come first serves. We use this resource to be able to trigger our economic strategy and push for those sectors and those employers that we want to see as part of our economy. Those would be funded from the existing council's £10 million investment in York Central. There's also a recommendation in the report for an allocation of £500,000 to fund the improvements to the off-site cycle and pedestrian facilities, upgrading the path between Jubilee Terrace and Scarborough Bridge. And finally, there's a recommendation to dispose of the land that the council initially acquired from Network Rail as part of a land deal to deliver the site. So to dispose of the canteen building to Network Rail for market value to facilitate the clearance of their operational facilities off the York Central site. All of these recommendations, all of the activity identified in this report will accelerate the work that was started on site and help us to get York Central to finally become a reality and contribute to its economic growth, creating the space for 21st century jobs, delivering much needed housing, as well as creating excellent new public realm and green open space to augment this already great city. I recommend the report to you and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll just make a few comments first, but as you've already outlined, there has been a great deal of progress made to date in unlocking the York Central site. And as it stands, we're closer than ever to achieving all of those benefits for the city that are detailed in paragraph 11. And as reported in paragraph 10, we've reached a number of important milestones in the development of the site, from establishing the York Central Partnership to creating the enterprise zone and the award-winning master plan. Over the past few months, residents will have seen contractors on site delivering the first phase of infrastructure works, and having had the opportunity to visit the site and see the works taking place, it is encouraging to know that real progress is being made, something I'm sure that residents and businesses have wanted to see for many years, if not decades now. The purpose of this report is to build on those milestones and continue that momentum. With over 155 million worth of investment secured to invest in our city, it is absolutely essential that we do what we can to reach the next stage. Unfortunately, like so many other areas of the economy, the cost of constructing has increased. And as detailed in paragraph 18, the costs of the infrastructure works were estimated and verified in 2018, but since then we've seen inflation linked to Brexit, the pandemic, and more recently, sadly, the war in Ukraine. This, in addition to the fact that the very nature of developing a large brownfield site can be costly, given the necessity to clear the site before infrastructure can be delivered. With all of this in mind and given the significance of the York Central scheme, I'm happy to support the recommendation to release £35 million of the enterprise zone funding and enter into agreement with Homes England to contribute to the infrastructure costs. By doing so, we can maintain that crucial momentum and ensure that some of the public benefits of the scheme that were outlined in the master plan are delivered, in particular the new pedestrian and cycle routes. I'm also happy to support the other recommendations that are detailed, including marketing the site to attract occupiers and that the Jubilee Terrace to Scarborough Bridge Riverside Path is delivered. There is no major project or development more important to the future of our city than York Central, and this is an opportunity that many other cities and towns could only dream of having, something demonstrated by the government's recent interest to relocate a civil service hub to the site, I think described as a major occupier in some other forums. And we must seize that opportunity with both hands, and therefore I am happy to support those recommendations. Before I then open it for any questions, Councillor Melly had a couple of points regards conditions and community space. Don't know if either of you could just pick up that, it would be interesting. Thank you.
I'll start in reverse order with Councillor Melly's queries. The provision of community space is part of the York Central outline planning application. The reality of providing commercial, I wasn't sure whether she was asking for community space on the location of where the canteen is, but that's never really going to be a possibility. That is going to be an industrial facility that will not be compatible with a community usage, and I think it's extremely likely that the canteen building, because of its condition, will be demolished. So I think the community space is an important issue. It's part of the outline planning application, and that's the relevant place for us to seek the delivery of that from the landowners. So I think that covers that one. The second point, I'm going to ask for a bit of assistance from Tony on this one around the decision in the report to delegate to officers the agreement of the stopping up order is different to the agreement of the walkways agreement with National Railway Museum, which is part of the planning conditions from the outline plan application, not the stopping up order. So they're very different things. I don't know if you want to come in on that, Tony.
Yeah, just quickly, I mean, the conditions on the stopping up order were specified by the planning inspector and then agreed by the Secretary of State. And primarily it relates to the provision of alternative routes for vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists to run around the area which is to be stopped up. When it comes down to the actual detail of the implementation of that stopping up, it needs to be certified by the council to say that those conditions have been met, and the proposal is for that to be delegated to the director. The other item in relation to the walkways agreement is that the high-level principles of the approach to be progressed for access through the museum for pedestrians was the subject of public consultation and approval by the planning committee. The walkways agreement has been approved, which is considered to be an appropriate balance for securing access for pedestrians during the museum opening hours, whilst taking account of the reasonable operational requirements of the museum. The layout of the walkways route is subject to a current reserve matters application by the museum.
Thank you very much. So I'll open it for any questions or comments from colleagues. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report. I've just got a couple of questions for clarity first in terms of the report. On page 130, the recommendations, is it a typo between recommendation 2 and recommendation 3?
Yeah, I'm going to blame Neil for this one because I handed it over without that typo in. So yes, that is a typo. It's one recommendation.
One recommendation. Okay, thanks. And also, for my sake and for the sake of any members of the public watching, can you talk me through the cash flow modelling so that I can make sense of it? Because I'm not getting it on page 137 of the pack.
Sorry, I haven't got any page numbers. Can you give me a para number?
Paragraph 30.
Right, so and this is where I wish I brought Patrick. I don't know whether Debbie wants to dive in and help me here, but the modelling took the baseline level of commercial development based on the quantum of development and a predicted rate of rateable value, modelled that up, then deducted the cost of borrowing to give you the net position after borrowing that the NNDR retention would generate to be able to repay the borrowing. And then the final column, I think, is the deficit position for the early years when we've got borrowing, but we haven't got the income.
So just for clarity on that then, so what's the low minus 8.8% 3 year? What does all that mean? It's like there's a delay in 3 years with the programme or with occupation, or?
Tracy, just before you do, Neil was indicating.
Yeah. So within the outline planning application, different levels of commercial development were possible because there were swing properties. You might remember that some of them could be housing or commercial. So what the finance team have done is looked at the lowest planning permission in the outline planning application for commercial, and that's the low scenario. And then it effectively modelled that as being delivering 3 years late or 2 years late. Then baseline, which is what we would expect to deliver, or there's an assumption that it's been delivered, and then high is actually towards the higher end of the outline planning application threshold for commercial development. So it allows for the swing properties.
There's 3 different variants of what would impact on the modelling. There's one about the rateable value, and that first column is a baseline assumption based on the financial modelling being done by the landowners, minus 8.8 is the lower level of where we think that might end up being. The second one is the speed at which it gets delivered. So the first year that you start to generate the EZ, and that's the delay column. The third one is then the quantum that Neil just referred to there. So it could be the maximum, there's a minimum quantum within the outline plan application, and then then that takes taken down. I think that reflects the 20% there.
Great, thanks. And on all those scenarios, the final column is how much interest we'd be paying each year.
It's the earlier deficit. So it's the financial cost to the council ahead of the EZ monies coming in. And that the repayment of that is covered in para 32.
Questions as well, actually, if that's, yeah, nobody else? No? Okay, just me. Thanks. In terms of the walkways agreement, given that was one of the conditions that needed discharging to reserved matters, is the walkways agreement going to come back to that planning committee to look at the reserved matters for public scrutiny and for everybody to be able to have their say on that? I think that would be useful. Should we do one at a time?
The walkways agreement, which was presented at the public inquiry, was one that was agreed with the council at that stage. The condition 45 in the outline planning application is a planning condition which will be discharged through the planning department. Whether that is taken through to committee or not, I'm not sure whether that has been decided or not.
Neil.
So if it would please members, we could effectively make the discharge of the walkway agreement in consultation with the executive member for transport. So effectively, I can see where the confusion is coming up here is because the reserve of the walkways agreement is effectively giving effect to the outline planning application. So the outline planning application has been outlined by Tony, effectively tells you how people are going to go through the NRM. The walkways agreement gives it legal effect between us as the Highways Authority and the NRM. And the reserve matters application will in itself determine the physical layout over which because the walkways agreement is a legislative piece between us as Highways Authority and the NRM, but the physical buildings is the reserve matters application. Once the reserve matters application is considered, it will have to be then tied in with the walkways agreement. So effectively, if the physical layout of the NRM reserve matters application is different from the walkways agreement in terms of the route, then the walkways agreement would need to be amended. So the question then would be is who makes the decision to amend the walkways agreement, because the walkways agreement is a highways authority function. That walkways agreement was originally an officer decision. And what I would suggest, if you wish to make the decision this evening executive because of the issue has been raised, is that that decision could be made in consultation with the executive member for transport, and therefore the executive member would have the opportunity to see whether or not the walkways agreement amendment was material and should be subject to public discussion, or was actually just a matter of seeking to comply with whatever the decision of the planning authority would be in terms of the reserve matters application.
What recommendation number would that relate to?
10.
10.
Which might become the new 9 once we get rid of number 3.
Just say that.
Oh,
say
yes.
that. Number 9.
Yeah, because the number 3's slipped in.
Okay. So recommendation 9 would just get an additional in brackets in consultation with the executive member for transport.
Yes, and then the executive member will be able to take a view as to the materiality of any changes to the walkway agreement, because I understand the concerns that have been suggested in public is that somehow it will amend the principles of the planning application, which clearly would be a matter of public concern.
Yeah.
But if it's just a technical realignment to comply with members' decision on the RMA, it may be that it doesn't warrant a public decision.
Councillor Diggle.
Yeah, I mean, I would be happy to agree with that amendment. I just think, given the attention, obviously, from all councillors and residents, that this is attracted in relation to reserved matters. I think my understanding is that the reserved matters application doesn't actually reference the walkways agreement, and I would have some concerns in terms of the processing of the planning committee when they come to consider the application would need some greater clarity than appears to be at the moment on the application. Otherwise, you know, the debate is going to be around the walkways agreement, which, as I understand, it's not documented within the application as it stands.
So, in terms of as Tony highlighted, the principle of the outline planning application effectively members confirmed the view as to how people should be diverted subject to the stopping up order. Stopping up order has been now granted, therefore the walkways agreement in terms of the requirement for that comes about because that was required as part of the outline planning application. The reserve matters application must be in conformity, one would have thought, from your perspective. It clearly doesn't have to be, but one would have thought you would want it to be in conformity with their outline planning application. So what we can do is make sure that that point is emphasised by the planning officers in respect to the relationship between the outline planning application and reserve matters application, and the effect the walkways agreement is just giving effect from the highways authority of those two decisions that you've already made, with the principle being in the outline planning application and a specific route or any specific nuances that come out of the RMA, and clearly that would have to be considered by members through the RMA reserve matters application process.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks. And obviously we would request that that is done in consultation with the ward councillors. Okay, thanks. Just a couple of more questions. Clearly we can see the costs are increasing already. It is starting to feel a little bit like a balloon that we've got hold of and we've got to hang on to as the costs increase. And of course, the payback time was 6 years into the enterprise zone now. So the payback time is shortening. And as the group that's likely to pick up the bill in a year or so's time, we do have concerns about the increased levels of debt. I can see from the modelling that you've clearly explained that it's coverable within the model for York Central, but does it have an impact on the other capital programme in terms of the increased levels of borrowing that we'd be committing the council to? And I'll finish on just one more question in terms of the access road. Is it still the intention that the new access road that goes in from Water End eventually will form part of a new arterial road into York for all traffic through the Lehman Road tunnel?
That was agreed in the outline planning application and that remains untouched.
And in terms of the overall programme, Councillor Gilbane, absolutely spot on. Yeah, we need to very much be mindful of the increases of costs associated with post-Brexit and the Ukraine war impacts on the provision, particularly of steel. The costs are going up quite dramatically, and clearly those costs will be relayed to executive at any decision point when they commit to deliver a project. And so at this stage, we've got, as you aware, the major capital programme, we've got a number of projects in the pipeline, but commitment to build is not given on the vast majority of those. So Outer Ring Road, Castle Gateway, for example, they are still waiting for the process of procurement to give a figure, and that figure will effectively reflect the market conditions at that time. An executive will have to take a view as to the impact of the overall scale and ambition and the borrowing required to deliver that.
If I can just come in on the question of the level of borrowing that we'll be undertaking, it is entirely within those sums already identified for enterprise zone borrowing. That sum has already been agreed through executive and through full council, and this does not exceed it, therefore doesn't change our medium-term financial strategy. I don't want to pull in Debbie to comment on that.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that, Tracy, is that what we're talking about here is essentially bringing forward some borrowing that's already been agreed. It's not additional, so it's already included in the capital programme in our treasury management prudential indicators, so we're not exceeding any of those indicators.
I guess the question is that you've partly answered, Neil, is will it knock out any of the other capital programmes that we suddenly can't afford because we've had to bring forward this borrowing?
This one, no, this is entirely separate because of the enterprise zone, and I think the consideration for members going forward, and I entirely expect there to be more requests for further enterprise zone funding going forward, is that you'll get greater certainty as the site actually develops out as to the delivery of those. That rateable income, and clearly, unfortunately for the tax-paying businesses, the business rates will continue to rise as alongside the costs in broader society. So you can expect that the borrowing ability of the authority may rise over time to meet those some of those increased costs of construction, but it's entirely separate from their broader borrowing requirements.
Yeah, just to be absolutely clear, if we don't borrow this money, we don't get to borrow it to do something else with it, because we won't get the enterprise zone funding to repay it. This is entirely insulated from the rest of our capital programme in that way.
Thank you very much. So cannot see any other further hands. So we've got the recommendations in front of us on pages 130 and 131. Councillor de Gorn agreed earlier that, as discussed, we could add that reference to in consultation with the executive member for transport for what is recommendation bullet point 9. That all correct, Janie? Before I then ask for everybody to indicate if they are happy with that as amended, please. So that's a clear consensus in favour of those recommendations. Thank you very much. And that then takes us through onto agenda item 9. So I think Councillor Waller will leave us at this point: future of Acomb Front Street, enhancing economic growth for secondary shopping areas. And this report starts for us on page 161. And by the looks of it, I'm handing over to Tracy first.
Thank you very much. I'll give a brief intro, and then I'm going to hand over to Katie Beekbout, who's our regeneration project manager, who has recently taken over this project from the economic development team who initiated the work. So it updates on work originally agreed in scope in 2018 to establish intermediate measures and initiate a study and consultation on longer term improvements to Acomb Front Street.
So it was procured and commissioned before COVID as part of the work of the economic development team before they were integrated into a broader economy and regeneration team. COVID intervened. We had to pause the consultation, didn't actually initiate the commission until after many of the lockdowns had intervened, recommenced that work in March 2021 as part of the work of that combined team with more resource and a more structured approach to regeneration approaches. Paragraph 16 sets out that regeneration approach, which starts with the establishment of an open brief to explore and engage and create ideas and understand the current situation before those ideas become formalised. That then passes on into a kind of ideas shaping and definition, understanding the limitations that exist around any ideas that come out of that consultation process, which then get built into a master plan, which then moves through into delivery. So it's kind of 4-stage process, and this report is very much that kind of stage one element of it, where we are identifying whether there is a need to change, what people want to see, and how that change might be taken forwards. So Katie's just going to take you through some of the work done today and some of the findings from that consultation, and then I'll pick up at the end about what we do next.
Thanks, Tracy. So the purpose of the engagement was to understand who uses Acomb Front Street, how people get there, and to get people's views on and ideas on how Acomb Front Street could be improved. Obviously, COVID changed the way that the engagement was due to be undertaken, but we still managed to proceed with doing face-to-face surveys and online surveys. There was a broad range of views that this gathered. So there's over 1,200 responses, including 32 businesses that responded. And these views were mixed, particularly between businesses and the shoppers and residents. And there was also a mix of views between businesses depending on where they were located, whether they were in the pedestrianised area or area B, which is indicated in the report. Overall, 43% of respondents spoke highly of Front Street, particularly citing the greengrocers and the good mix of shops and services that were available. 26% of respondents were critical, feeling that the area was scruffy and had too many charity shops and bookmakers, almost indicating that there was not enough variety. The main ideas that respondents came up with were to improve the appearance of the street and seating, increase the variety of shops and businesses, and a number of businesses expressed a desire to use the front of their premises to bring more life into the street and to spill out into that street and that area. As well as since the engagement was undertaken, there was a perception of decline sort of put forward through the engagement, but actually there have been a number of new businesses that have come into the Acomb area, which are quite broad ranging. So there's the Bluebird Bakery, Heron Foods, I believe the Wine Bar and Nail Bar are due to open this year. So showing an increase in businesses coming to the area, but also a mix. As part of the consultant's report, there were a number of ideas put forward. This took into consideration some of the feedback received in the engagement, and also looking at the public realm and the street layout. As we noted, the engagement was sometimes contradictory, and the contradictions in the ideas have not been sort of unpicked by the consultants, but more looking at the public realm and what was possible, pulling out some of the ideas. In terms of delivering the immediate improvements, there were a number of improvements identified in the initial brief, which was approved in 2018. The purpose of these was to improve footfall in the area. Pre-COVID, a number of schemes were delivered, including the Acomb Dance and Music Festival, and there was also Christmas lights pre-COVID. During COVID, this obviously lengthened out the project, and there were a number of additional years of Christmas lights that were provided. As set out in the table, there was additional funding leveraged into the project. This helped to contribute to delivering a number of the schemes. And there was also internal budget that was allocated to continue to provide the Christmas lights during COVID and to continue to drive the footfall in the area.
So I think from what Katie's run through there, you can see it's not an entirely straightforward picture that everybody agrees what should happen next. Positive changes had been made through this project to the appearance of Acomb Front Street, and the report sets out a series of future ideas which could be pursued. However, there isn't at the moment a capital budget to be able to deliver on those. And many of the ideas are actually for businesses themselves to take forward, as much of the area that is covered by this is actually owned by the shop owners or Morrison's. And therefore, it's something that we would provide support for Retail Traders Association to take forwards, as well as considering other sources of funding, which are all set out in the report. So we're happy to recommend the report to you and to take further questions.
Thank you very much. I'll open it in a second to any questions or comments. Before we do, just with Councillor Waller declaring an interest, I noticed on paragraph 36, Jamie's just going to clarify a point.
Thank you, Chair. Given that Councillor Waller has declared an interest and left the room for the discussion of this meeting, my suggestion is that paragraph 36 is amended and that the feasibility work would be made by the leader, and under our governance model it is for the leader to either retain the consultation exercise and intentions of paragraph 36 to himself, or he can delegate this to an appropriate executive member who is not conflicted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eyre, I'll go to you first.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to observe that this meeting, like last meeting, I'm only substituting for one person rather than two. And then I heard that amendment and I thought, hang on a minute, I'm now going to be substituting in a further decision down the line by the looks of it. So, and on this occasion, I don't have any awards to take credit for in this particular case. So clearly welcome the report that's come forward. I think I wanted to clarify a little bit the timeline around this, given some of the comments made by the public speaker. So there was reference to a paper back in 2017 that was actually a much wider highways paper. I think it's probably, to use a slogan of choice about picking up the bill, that particular 2017 paper included the allocation of 700,000 plus of funding from the Lendl Bridge fiasco. So it was a really significant piece of highways funding. It was around about £4 million worth of schemes, of which this was actually only about 2.5% of what was allocated. So a significant amount of work has gone in from that paper to the point we're at now. I think, I'm not sure which exec member it is, he may report me, but I think it was enlightened of that particular exec member to take the opportunity in 2018 to revisit what was that original highways paper around built infrastructure and look at bringing forward something that was a bit broader, look more about how we could support economic growth and how we could support the secondary shopping centres, and really sort of expanded the brief out from that original highways paper in 2017. It was particularly timely then in terms of how we were looking to invest in our secondary shopping centres, making sure they were fit for purpose going forward. Even more timely with the issues that 18 months later we were hit by the pandemic, and those centres really do need that attention more now than ever. It has led to further delays in getting to the stage we're at now, which is unfortunate, but it has allowed us more time and more opportunity to converse with more residents. I think it's important to reflect on what actually has been achieved already. So I know pages 169 and 170, it goes into more detail about what has actually been happening in the Acomb area during that period. And I think, as officers alluded to, what has come out of that consultation is that if we're likely to do any sort of meaningful regeneration in these particular areas, it will take time, it will take consultation, and it will take significant investment, of which there isn't anything at the moment identified in the budgets. Page 172 does allude to some of those opportunities, and those are opportunities that myself and officers and Councillor Wall himself have been looking at to see where we can locate that funding that would allow us to make meaningful changes. I know the speaker did make reference to the £50,000 that was in the, well, they didn't make reference to the £50,000, the budget amendment glossed over the fact that it was only £50,000 and wouldn't have delivered any of the things that are outlined within this within this report. So it is important to note that we're looking to make meaningful change, not just little token gestures that look good on people's election leaflets. It's also the wider regeneration of the area. Page 179 outlines over £700,000 of investment that's going in to the Acomb area. I think, again, looking at a particular piece of vacant land that was identified for significant regeneration back in around 2010, but the administration, as it was at 2011, abandoned Acomb at that particular point and left that piece of land vacant. I think I'll finish by just saying that I'd like to thank the public, the residents and businesses that took part in this work. As officers have mentioned, over 1,200 residents, 32 businesses, all with their own ideas, all with their own challenges, and it gives us a fantastic opportunity to test those out properly, reflect on the views of those people that have taken part, reflect on what the opportunities are, as was alluded to by officers, often diverse, often contradictory, a lot of opportunity, lots of more work to be done, and I look forward to being able to identify the funding to take this forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duggan.
Yeah, just want to very much welcome this work. It certainly has helped bring out the different views of local residents. I thought it was interesting to note the reference that one of the interesting statistics in here, that 85% of those who were interviewed actually travelled to Front Street by walking, which demonstrates the importance of the public realm in and around and actually the connections. I think one of the points was made about the route from the Morrison's car park through to the shopping centre, and little things like that can be quite important in terms of making people feel safer and more attractive, drawing people into the centre from where they might have parked. And also just wanted to note on page 171, there's reference to other investments around Front Street which are coming forward, which obviously this sort of map of possibilities does help to tie investment into a broader vision for the area. And within that is one which was in my portfolio, the active travel fund cycle routes from paragraph 56 onwards. Make some reference there to the money which is available to improve and enhance active travel access to this important local shopping centre.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, and thanks for the report. I don't know if you've got the same page numbers as us, but I've got a question about one of the graphs on page 188 about net promoter score. So I'm not entirely sure if I understood. Is that actually saying that nearly 59% of residents and shoppers would not recommend Front Street to their friends or family? Is that the situation we're in?
Apologies, we didn't kill a tree by printing it out twice, so we're just going to have to borrow somebody else's copy. Can we come back to you on that one?
Sure you can, yeah. And just must respond to Councillor Ayres' comments, because I can always tell when Councillor Ayres knows he's on a sticky wicket because he starts throwing around distraction stats. The bottom line is, it was 4 years ago that this £50,000 was awarded, and looking at the report, it's still going to be a long time before anything actually starts to happen. The only reason we're in this situation is because the York Labour Group and the MP have campaigned for it. When I've been on Front Street talking to shopkeepers and residents, they are aghast at the amount of money that's been spent on consultants, and they tell me lots of things that could be happening that they'd like to see happening that cost next to nothing and could easily be tried out. There's a real can-do attitude amongst the traders on Front Street, and I'm afraid a real can't-do attitude amongst the exec here. However, I will finish on a positive note. It is good to see the blue badge parking being retained, and it is good to see that we will have an active travel route all the way from the Fox up to Front Street in spite of the opposition of Councillor Wallace. So well done, Councillor de Gaulle.
I think fair to say, Councillor Kilbane, I suspect we wouldn't agree with your interpretation just given. But as Councillor Waller is not here, he would not characterised his stance as opposition. He would have said that he wanted more information in order to do a consultation and engage with the community on the pros and cons of that scheme. And obviously that is an important difference, not to misrepresent by accident. So we have the recommendations in front of us, and I can't see any other hands on page 162. So all equally with that minor amendment to the report, just to reflect the executive member portfolio, I don't want to say portfolio change, that makes it even more, the slight tweak that Janie told us about earlier. Are colleagues happy to approve those recommendations? Thank you very much. That's a clear consensus in favour of that. Thank you very much. We will now give a couple of seconds for Councillor Waller to come back into the room whilst we get ready to move on to report number 10, which is the future of primary school places in Naburn. And this starts on page 275 of our packs. Maxine has joined us, and I was going to say as well, Jamila, I don't know if you noticed, it's a typo, but your previous job title was listed as presenting the report on Acomb Front Street. So I did feel like trying to go to you, but then when Tracy joined the table, I thought I will not do that. But obviously we have Jamila and also Maxine here. Am I going straight to Maxine? Welcome, and over to you. You've got the middle button.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I think that can everybody hear me now? Is that one working? Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. The report in front of you describes the complex and challenging context in which the village of Naburn finds itself in terms of the delivery of primary school places. Naburn Primary School over a number of years has seen fluctuating patterns of demand for primary school places in the village. And what has been happening over the last 5 years is a gradual change in the demographic patterns within the village, which has seen a decline in the number of children actually living within the catchment area, and the children allocated to the school being made up by children who were actually brought into the village. What we have done over the last 2 years is that we've been engaging with the governing body, because they realise the financial implications of the demographic changes on the school's budgets because of the pupil-led funding. And so over the last 2 years, we've been exploring options around the sustainability of primary school places in Naburn, given that we knew that there was a continuing demographic dip that was influencing admissions into the school. That work with the governing body has looked at a full range of options, including federating with another maintained school. Unfortunately, that option wasn't possible to be taken forward due to the circumstances of the school that we were working with, and it proved impossible to take that forward. In December 2021, the school was re-inspected by Ofsted. It was sitting on a legacy judgment from 2007 of outstanding. We'd done various reviews of the school and knew that it was very unlikely that it would be able to retain that judgment, despite improvement work that was taking place. That included a restructuring of the school in order to address its budgetary problems in the summer of 2021, leading to a temporary headship arrangement, and we've currently got an acting head in there 3 days a week. But despite the hard work of that acting head teacher, the school was unable to demonstrate that it was making sufficient improvements to be able to demonstrate that it was still delivering a good quality of education. And so in December 2021, it was judged to require special measures by Ofsted. As a consequence of that, schools that require special measures are subject to a mandatory academy order. And that academy order was put in place by the Regional Schools Commissioner in March 2022. So there is now a directive academy order on the school. The Regional Schools Commissioner's office are very, very clear that there are some fragilities around the school because of its current pupil number, which means that it is difficult for an academy sponsor to see it as a viable school in the future on the pupil numbers that it has. And that is because its broader financial situation remains very, very uncertain. And that makes it unattractive to an academy sponsor. We are working with the Diocese of York very actively to seek out a suitable academy sponsor because its best chance is that it goes into a larger multi-academy trust that can actually put in executive management arrangements, because as it is on its current pupil numbers, it cannot afford a full-time head teacher. And that makes it very, very fragile in terms of its improvement journey, because some of the improvement it needs to make requires enhanced leadership, and that requires it to be part of a multi-academy trust that can actually manage that for it. So what we are actively working on is a parallel track of activity, which both Ofsted and the RSC are aware of, which is that we seek a multi-academy trust within the next 6 to 8 months. That's part of the RSC's timeline, because they feel that an academy sponsor would come forward in that period of time if there is an academy sponsor out there who is able to do this piece of work. But that we've also got to, in parallel, look at the end of that period, if the search for a sponsor does not find a sponsor, that we have to have a longer term solution for the delivery of secure primary places for the children of Naburn. And that means that we should look in parallel to start a statutory consultation, which could result in the closure of the school. And I would say could result, but it's very, very important that we actually explore that as an option alongside looking for a sponsor. It's important that we do that in parallel, because if we don't find a sponsor at the end of the 8 months, we'd have to start that process, and that continues the fragility of the school. And it also means that the school is not able to deliver the quality of education that we would want for the children of Naburn because of the lack of resource that they'd have because of those small pupil numbers. Currently, the school is having to deliver its provision through mixed age classes. And that means it has basically 2 classes, which are Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. They're covering a big age range. So we have 2 classes, one of which is covering the 5 to 7 age range, the other, the 7 to 11 age range. That means you've got two small classes where children don't have a natural peer group. That's been one of the things that parents in the village have been considering over time, and that's caused in-year movement. So some children in the village now go to Escrick school to find an appropriate year group so that they're part of a larger year group. That will continue, we feel, over the next year or so if we're not able to find that academy sponsor. And also it impacts on the ability to actually address the areas for improvement. And that's not to denigrate the work that the current team are doing, because they're working extremely hard, as is the governing body. The governing body are realistic about the situation that the school is in. Obviously, they are working very, very hard to try and ensure the future viability of the school, but they are also aware that they face some real difficulties in doing that. And as does the diocese. So we're working in complete partnership with the Diocese of York. It is a voluntary controlled school rather than a voluntary aided school, but the Diocese of York do own the site. They do own the building. So it's as I say, it's not a CUIC building, even though it's a maintained school. It's wholly owned by the Diocesan Board of Finance. But again, we're working in complete partnership around that future of the school. We do intend to organise a community engagement events to take place in the next 2 weeks, again to ensure that the community are fully aware of the situation that the school is currently in. And we do intend to involve both the executive member for children education and the ward member in that meeting. I'll open it up to any questions there.
Thank you very much for that. So, as you say, open for any questions and comments to Councillor Cuthbertson first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Maxine, for that very clear explanation. For anybody who wants to understand the enormity of the tasks that's facing the teaching staff at Naburn, if they look at pages 2, 3 and 4 of the Ofsted report, it's there in black and white. The report in front of you on pages 276 onwards gives an indication of the volatility of the role changes that have happened over the last few years in Naburn, and it also explains quite clearly why the financial situation for the school has become difficult. It also, in the Ofsted report, outlines very clearly what needs to be done to improve the school and to bring the quality of education and management back up to the standard that's required. That is unlikely to be done with a part-time head teacher. And despite the fact that the school staff are working hard, I think they need additional expertise injecting to provide the additional breadth of curriculum, delivery, discipline, the areas that are of weakness that are identified in the Ofsted report, and that in itself is a big problem. So the school is starting from a very low base, but to adopt either one of the two proposals that is being put forward in the twin track approach without regard for the other, actually is a recipe for great difficulty later in the process. So I have no hesitation whatsoever in endorsing what Maxine's outlined as the twin track approach, and also in supporting a community engagement event, at which I know Councillor Vassey will be present. I think that sums up what I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I cannot see any other questions or indications to speak. So we have the recommendation, which is in front of us on page 275. Just one question from myself, Maxine, which it may well say, but at the end of that 6 to 8 month period, when the consultation has happened, what would then be the next step if either an academy trust was found or it wasn't? Would it then come back to the executive?
Yes, yeah, it would. Obviously, if a trust comes forward, then the normal process of conversion will actually take place as a sponsored academy, and that's a defined process which we would follow through, and the school would be transferred into that multi-academy trust. A date for conversion would be set with the RSC, and that conversion will take place, and it would join the multi-academy trust. If unfortunately we're not able to find a sponsor within that period of time, obviously we would be coming back to the executive to present the results of the consultation and to outline the process for closing the school.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendation in front of us on page 275. Can I please see if colleagues are happy to accept that recommendation? So thank you very much. That's clear consensus in favour of accepting that recommendation. Thank you. So that then takes us to agenda item 10, which is actions in response to the DfT's bus funding announcement, and this starts on page 285, and I'll hand over to Neil first.
Yeah. I'll not steal Michael's thunder on the good news, but just point of clarification on point 12 for members. In terms of it says in there it's not required for this draft summary to have full democratic approval. It's just that you've already effectively given approval to the bus service improvement plan, and the submission that will be made on the 2nd of May will be in accordance with that already agreed bus service improvement plan. It's not like we're going to dream up another plan of implementation. So you have had a democratic hand on that proposal, and I'll let Michael talk to you through the report.
Thank you very much. Good evening. The city in the last few weeks has been really successful against strong competition in receiving funding allocations to improve bus services across the city. That's included the zebra funding for zero emission buses, which we got 8.4 million, and that will be match funded by operators to the tune of an additional 10 million. And we've also received an indicative BSIP announcement, bus service improvement plan, for 17.36 million for the years 22 to 25. The report is to set out the next steps to ensure that we secure the BSIP funding, which has been set by the DfT, and there are two key deadlines to ensure that we can secure that funding. The first deadline falls next week, 2nd of May, when we need to submit a draft summary table outlining the key actions that we will deliver as part of that funding agreement. And that will prioritise the interventions that we're going to take in the network, both from a capital point of view on the network, but also from a revenue point of view. It will also set out the delivery timelines and also set out the sort of indicative costs that go with each of those actions. The following deadline, which is the 30th of June, which will be based around feedback that we received from the DfT to our submission on the 2nd of May, will be to substantially or to reinforce that summary table, to outline the expenditures that we're going to make, to receive letters of support from the bus operators to the bus improvement plan, and to ensure that we can demonstrate value for money to the DfT in terms of the interventions that we're going to take. We also need to submit at that time a draft enhanced bus partnership plan, and that's set out in two parts. One is a strategic plan, which sets out the strategic direction of the enhanced bus partnership, and the second is the scheme, which sets out the delivery of the plan based around the BSIP allocation. So the key strategic interventions that we'll take and how we'll actually deliver those. In terms of putting the enhanced bus partnership together, there is a statutory consultation period to go through. That would be after we'd submitted the draft plan, and that would be both with the objectors, with the operators have an objection period of 30 days, and also a wide-reaching stakeholder consultation period, which we'll also undertake before the plan was actually finalised. Given the very tight timescales set out by the DfT, the report seeks delegation to ensure that the City Council can secure the BSIP funding. And that's
Thank you very much, Michael. And before I go to Councillor de Gorn in a second and then open up for any comments, I'll just say a few quick words. Firstly, I'm really pleased to see the efforts within the bus service improvement plan being rewarded by securing that funding, as just mentioned, and over 17 million of investment to improve local bus services. And we know that many residents across the city rely on local buses, and with this funding, we hope to make a series of improvements to the local network over the coming months and years, from installing new lighting and real-time bus information at bus stops to increasing the frequency of bus services and providing more routes for residents to benefit from. That part of improving local public transport is clearly a fundamental element of our carbon reduction goals and the development strategy set out in the draft local plan. And we know that to encourage greater take-up of public sustainable travel, you have to provide more safe, convenient and frequent services. And as you mentioned, this 17 million is on top of the 8.4 million that the council secured to purchase an additional 44 electric buses for the city. And this is clearly a testament to the excellent work by a number of people, including partners and officers, already going on in the city to decarbonise and enhance our bus network, and the plans we have in place to help improve services for residents. So certainly very happy to endorse the recommendations outlined in the paragraphs, and to ensure all required documentation is sent to the DFT. And on that, go to Councillor de Gorn.
Yes, well, I'd like to echo the thanks to officers for putting together a successful submission, particularly as been referred to the level of competition that's being for this funding and the fact that some neighbouring authorities were unsuccessful in their bids. You certainly worked against challenging timescales with the local operators to develop proposals that will be critical to our post-COVID and zero carbon transport strategy. The £17.36 million will help enormously to enhance and develop public transport across the city, working in partnership with the operators and building on the 2 decades of work already we've had through the existing Quality Bus Partnership. Our bus service improvement plan outlines a clear vision for the future of local bus services in York, which must be inclusive, accessible, attractive, welcoming, and adapting to new travel patterns and expectations of local residents, businesses, and visitors. So to achieve this, the BSIP puts forward a wide range of measures, some of which you've mentioned, Chair, such as increasing frequency, providing more routes, supporting reintroduction of the A59 park and ride service from Poppleton Bar following its use as a COVID testing centre, cheaper tickets for young people, rollout of real-time screens in other locations such as suburbs and villages, and completing the electrification of a large part of the York bus fleet. In addition to that, there's the plans to upgrade the park and ride network and allowing it to support a wide range of services, such as providing overnight parking at more of sites and refurbishing to older sites, the Rawcliffe Bar and Grimston Bar. Other features which have been included in our submission include things like tap on and tap off technology to a speed boarding and to allow for multi-operator ticketing and caps on fares. And further priority measures that will be identified to assist punctuality through a city centre bus study, which is already being commissioned. So as detailed in reports, the announcement of the funding made earlier this month is now needs further information to be submitted to the Department for Transport. We intend to work with operators and a wide range of stakeholders, including passenger groups such as the York Bus Forum, to ensure that all views are represented. And further documentation, as has been outlined, will need to be provided to establish of a statutory enhanced partnership with local operators. And it is the partnership which will then ultimately deliver the ambitions which are outlined in the bus service improvement plan. Having prepared the draft plans and schemes in January, it's pleasing to see this work, subject to our agreement tonight, progressing to the consultation stage that's been referred to, which was sort of a slightly delayed because of the change in timescale from the DFT earlier this year. So I'm happy to support the proposed recommendations that's in paragraph 3, references A to E.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you, Chair. And just before we all get carried away with the spin, you know, it's nowhere near the amount of money that we needed if we're going to have a cheap and reliable bus service. As indeed, you know, we didn't get anywhere near the amount of money that we put in for, but we did better than a lot of other authorities. But let's just be honest, you know, we're not in a good place with public transport in the UK. Fully accept that the pot was nowhere near big enough for the improvements. The national pot from the national government was nowhere near big enough to see the improvements that we want to get. I mean, well done on getting what we got, but let's be honest about it. It's nowhere near enough to provide us with the bus service that we need. Just in terms of the consultation, I'm happy to hear Councillor de Gorn saying that there will be a consultation with stakeholder groups, because in the report itself, it just talks about an online consultation once the plan is submitted. So can we just be clear on the level and depth of consultation that we're going to have with passengers and stakeholder groups as we go through this process?
Michael.
Yeah, so just picking up on your comments around the allocation. Obviously, the allocation we've been given covers the years 2022 to 22-25. Within the BSIP application, we applied for 24 million to cover that period, and obviously we've secured the 17.36. If we actually look at the total BSIP allocation that we actually requested, that was around about 52 million. 13 million of that related to electric buses, and we're told that's funded through Zebra, not through the BSIP. So obviously we've secured that Zebra funding through a separate fund. So that 13 million can be sort of taken out straight away. And a further 12 million was actually post 2025. So you can actually bring that number down, and we have done, you know, a lot better than maybe what you think initially when you look at those numbers as a headline. That we've come very much closer to the original ask that we had for the period up to 2025. And there was a sort of an extra sort of 3 million of various bits and pieces which we were told weren't eligible for BSIP funding. So, you know, we've come very close to the funding allocation that we asked for within the BSIP, although we haven't achieved it, and we'd recognise that. In terms of your question around the consultation, obviously the consultation for the Enhanced Bus Partnership is set out by their TFT in terms of what we need to do. We have got to go through the 30-day operator consultation period, objection period. And obviously if we do get objections from the operators, we may have to go around that loop again. So obviously they can, you know, they have the ability to stop the enhanced partnership being formed. So we do need to recognise that, and we do need to work well. You know, we're already working with the operators, and we need to continue to work well with the operators to ensure that they support that objective. And I think at the moment, you know, they do, and we are seeking to make sure that we keep them on board, and that the partnership as it's put together does achieve what they want and what we want as a city, and delivers for the bus operator, for the bus users, and for the prospective bus users, because we want to encourage use of public transport, and that is obviously one of the keys to all of this, and securing the funding that does that. We'll also obviously be doing an extensive consultation with stakeholders. We're already engaged with the Bus Forum, but we need to make sure we extend beyond that, that we do engage with other groups who perhaps been more difficult to engage with, younger people, the student population, that they do fit into that young group, but they are a particular demographic that we need to ensure that we do fit with. So we need to make sure that we are getting that consultation out to a wide use. I mean, there are businesses and there are visitors to the city, or also other groups that we need to target who aren't necessarily represented at the moment. And we're doing extensive online consultation to ensure that when the plan reaches that point, we reach as much or as wide a groups as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can't see any further hands. So we've got the recommendations in front of us, starting on page 285. So if I could please see those colleagues happy to accept those recommendations. That's a clear consensus in favour of accepting them. Thank you very much. That then moves us on to agenda item 12, the adoption of enforcement powers under the Traffic Management Act, and this starts on page 295. Neil, don't know if you're starting or handing straight over.
Dave gets himself settled. Just to say, this is an opportunity for the authority to effectively take on board more powers that the Secretary of State are facilitating transport authorities to exercise, and the report goes through the detail of how we envisage we would seek to gain those powers. So I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Neil. Good evening, everyone. I'll try and make this quick since I think I'm last on, so mercifully quick. So the Traffic Management Act, Part 6, deals with traffic enforcement. So we already have powers for parking enforcement and for bus lane enforcement. So this is about moving vehicle enforcement, and specifically around band turns, access restrictions and yellow box junctions. DFT ran a consultation at the beginning of 2020 around pavement parking, but they extended the consultation out to consider moving traffic offences. We took a paper to in the spring 21 to one of the exec member for transport decision sessions, where we agreed we would write to the DFT expressing interest in applying for these powers when the clarity came back from DFT around what the scope of the extended powers would be. When DFT came back with guidance at the back end of that last year, early this year, it was restricted to band turns, access restrictions, yellow box junctions. So it doesn't address pavement parking in this round, but it is something that the DFT are currently considering. So as part of the process, which is to write to the DFT to apply for these powers, we first of all, and this moves into the recommendations, Chair. The first one is to seek a letter of support from the Chief Constable of North Yorkshire Police. So that's our first recommendation. That's number one. The second one is to get approval to initiate the public consultation period around adopting these powers, which is a 6-week consultation period. Number three is around actually sending through, giving us delegating to the Director of Environment Planning and Transport to make the application to the DFT for the extended powers. The fourth recommendation is around running a pilot to test what we would do in these situations. So one of the example in the report is the band right turn coming out of Lendal. So the number 4 is approval to move forward and take on a pilot and agree the detail of the pilot with and the implementation with the executive for transport. And then the 5th one is any further schemes to delegate to the exec member for transport for implementation of those schemes. And just for a point of clarity, when we talk about consultations, there'll be a full consultation on each individual scheme, including the pilot. So the 6-week consultation is a broad consultation about adopting the powers, but we still will need a formal consultation on any individual scheme.
Thank you very much. Councillor de Gorme.
Just to support this proposal, recognise that I think many people would have preferred if we had the increased powers to tackle pavement parking, but this proposal that's come forward from the government gives us scope to address some of those moving traffic offences, but the proposal is very much to take it at a pace that we can manage and assess through adopting a pilot specific measure, and obviously then in due course, if there are other moving traffic offences, that could be looked at subject to consultation to widen the powers once we've established the principles and the processes for these new powers.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report, Dave. Can I just ask a clarity? Would this apply to low traffic neighbourhoods? So if you had a restricted neighbourhood that only particular vehicles were allowed in, would these powers apply to enforcement there? And then a general question, how much is the fines likely to be if a driver has been found to have broken one of these rules and been picked up on the cameras or whatever?
So just to answer you. Just to switch the microphone on and answer your questions in reverse. At the moment, we charge between 50 and 70 pounds for a penalty charge notice, and it'll be subject to discussion and agreement, but it'll be around those terms. And in terms of the traffic, low traffic neighbourhoods, it'll depend on what signage we put in place and what restrictions we put in place. But the technology, the ANPR camera technology, to answer your question, in theory could support a low traffic neighbourhood, yeah.
Can't see any other hands up. So we have the recommendations in front of us for agenda item 12. Can I please see those that are happy to support those recommendations? So it's clear consensus in favour of supporting that. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
That takes us on to agenda item 13. As far as I'm aware, we don't have any urgent business today. So I'd just like to thank everybody for participating and watching the executive meeting this evening. Thank you.